All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us for walking the Camino de Santiago. It's my pleasure to introduce Meg Holmes. Meg Holmes feels very thankful that she has had a career that she truly enjoyed for over 33 years as a school librarian. She helps students develop a love of story and lifelong learning. When she retired, she and her husband, Jack, continued their own learning by traveling and exploring the world. Over the past 12 years, Meg has discovered the unique pleasure of distance walking and trekking, and in between trips to familiar and unfamiliar places, Meg teaches, I should have gotten the pronunciation on this, taiji, which is another enriching journey in itself. I again want to thank the Friends of the Tewksbury Library and the 10 other libraries that partnered for today's program. So all nearly 150 of us, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Meg for joining us this morning. And Meg, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I too want to thank all the libraries who are sponsoring this program. As a librarian, I really have to put in a plug for all libraries and their importance for everyone in the world. So good morning. Thank you for joining me. We are walking the Camino de Santiago. I have actually walked 3 Caminos in Spain from August through September 2011. I walked along the most popular Camino route, the Camino Frances, from Roncesvalles to Pamplona, and then from Leon to Santiago de Compostela with my friend Anne. In May and June of 2015, Anne and I returned to walk the entire Camino Frances from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. And then our friend Asunta joined us in Burgos to continue our way westward. And finally, in May of 2017, I walked the Camino Inglés and the Muxia Way by myself. The reason there is a Camino de Santiago is this man. This is St. James the Apostle. After the death of Christ, James went to the Iberian Peninsula to talk about Christianity. When he returned to Jerusalem, he became the first apostle to be martyred. He was beheaded. His followers brought his remains back to the Iberian Peninsula, where they were buried and kind of forgotten for a few centuries. Somewhere in the 7th and 8th century, the remains of St. James were found. A church was built to house the remains. People became aware of the fact that his relics were there and began to make pilgrimage to come to pay their respects. Pretty soon, the church became a cathedral, and around the cathedral grew the city of Santiago de Compostela. This is a statue of St. James as pilgrim. He's wearing the wide-brimmed hat for shade. He's wearing a cloak for warmth, carrying a walking staff, a gourd for water, and wearing the iconic symbol of the Camino, the scallop shell. But here is another sculpture, statue of St. James, Santiago Metamoro, St. James the Moor Slayer. Santiago, by the way, means St. James. According to history or legend, during the Reconquista, the Spaniards were fighting the Battle of Clavillo. They were losing. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, St. James appeared on a white stallion, brandishing a sword left and right and slaying the Moors, who of course were the Islamic conquerors of the Iberian Peninsula. My own view is I prefer the image of St. James the Pilgrim. During the Middle Ages, the Camino de Santiago became the 3rd most popular pilgrimage for Christians to take in Europe. And there were many different Caminos, not just one, because people would set out from their homes. to make their way to Santiago de Compostela. After the Reformation, the idea of pilgrimage fell into disfavor, but it was revived again in the 19th, 20th, 21st centuries. Particularly today, there's been a revival and renaissance. The Caminos de Santiago have become very popular again. This map shows some of the main historic routes that are still the routes used today. The yellow line is the French way, the Camino de Santiago, that most people think of when they think Camino. The purple line is the Portuguese way, which nowadays is the second most popular Camino. The second most popular used to be the Camino Norte, the northern one. I mentioned that I also walked the Camino Inglés, that is the English way, the red line, and the Muxia way, which is also the Finisterre way. Many pilgrims continue from Santiago to the Atlantic coast because in the Middle Ages, that was perceived to be the end of the world. This magenta line is in France. There were major Camino routes, or chemin in French, chemin routes that made their way through what became France. And the most popular today, there are 4 that are still used. The most popular today is Le Puy. In 2019, my friend Wander and I did the Le Puy route. Here is a map of the Camino Frances. If you look to the right, the orange is France. The border between France and Spain are the Pyrenees Mountains. So you start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, you climb over the Pyrenees Mountains to descend into Spain to Roncesvalles, and then eventually across northern Spain through some cities like Pamplona, Logroño, Burgos, León, and eventually to Santiago de Compostela. Nowadays, as I said, there's been a major revival of the Camino de Santiago, and there are thousands, even hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who now walk the route. They walk for as many individual reasons as there are people walking. When a pilgrim walks the Camino, she really walks 3 journeys. There's a physical journey, of course, but there's also an inward journey, a mental and spiritual journey. Because you're walking the Camino de Santiago with me this morning, I want you to be aware of some common pilgrim terms. A credencio, often called a pilgrim's passport. In the Middle Ages, when a pilgrim set out, often their local priest would give them a letter certifying that they were a pilgrim and asking people, churches along the way, to provide lodging and food. Nowadays, pilgrims have a credencio. They get it stamped along the way. When they reach Santiago de Compostela, if they want, they can go to the pilgrim's office, and the pilgrim's office will certify that they have completed the pilgrimage by issuing a certificate of Compostela. Along the way, modern pilgrims stay in an albergue. There are many types of albergues. The most basic are the municipal and the church-run albergues, basically a dormitory space with bunk beds and washing facilities. Nowadays, there are many more private albergues run by individuals with a few more amenities. The albergues are run by a hospitalera or a hospitalero. Along the way, you might encounter a Camino angel. A Camino angel is someone who suddenly, seemingly appears out of nowhere in a time of need, provides aid and help, and then often disappears immediately after. A Camino family, if you're lucky enough to have one, is a special grouping of pilgrims, usually people who don't know each other, but they become close friends, even more than friends, like a family, as they go along the Camino. They might walk with each other all the way to Santiago. They might walk with each other off and on, but they're always there, and they are people you can count on for help and support. Lastly, the term the Camino provides. I think in the Middle Ages, probably a pilgrim said, God provides, but nowadays this is more fashionable. And it pretty much means if you give yourself up to following the way will provide you with what you need when you need it. How do you find your way? Well, there are all kinds of waymarks and signage, mainly these big yellow painted arrows. In 2011, when I walked the Camino the first time, I found that I often wrote haiku poetry to record my impressions. This is one of them. Yellow waymarks guide my path. Even the flowers are yellow. Here, Anne and I are in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, France, ready to start our May 2015 Camino Frances. To go over the Pyrenees, you walk 15 miles along what is known as the Napoleon route. Here I've provided you some of the places you go by and their altitude to give you an idea of what the climb and the descent can be like. Everyone hopes, everyone expects that days climbing the mountains will be glorious and sunny, but as you can see, it's not always that way. We find ourselves walking into the fog and out of the fog, in and out all day long. This is the border crossing between France and Spain. Notice there are no passport control agents. It is a cattle grate. Finally, you reach the top and you begin to descend. You're descending down into Spain and you see Roncesvalles. From Roncesvalles to Burgos is about 200 miles. Again, I've provided you some of the places that you go by and their altitude. You can see that it's still very much up and down. As you leave Roncesvalles, you see the sign, Santiago de Compostela, 790 kilometers to go, even though we just climbed over the Pyrenees. 790 kilometers is roughly 500 more miles. As we walk, we see signage in Euskera, which is the Basque language, as well as in Spanish, and that is because this part of Spain is the region of the Basque people. And because we're still in the foothills, it is very much up and down into Pamplona. In 2011 and 2015, we stayed in the very large municipal albergue, Cristo y Maria. It used to be a seminary. You can see that they've installed all these cubicles with bunk beds. Nighttime in the albergue, concert of snoring. Leaving Pamplona and the Pyrenees, we are climbing up to the Alto du Pedron. At the top, there is a wind farm, as well as this beautiful sculpture dedicated to pilgrims and the Camino. Of course, when you go up, you have to go down. And when you start to go down the other side, this is your view across the vastness of Spain. One night we stay in this albergue. We have to climb 3 flights to this room, but we're rewarded because notice they're real beds, not bunk beds, and we happen to be by ourselves. The best thing was there was a communal dinner and it was paella. Moving on, we cross over the Roman bridge, Puente Lorena. We passed by, of course, many churches. This church had statues of all the apostles, and I imagine you can pick out St. James. Heading into wine country, Rioja. You might have heard of the famous Spanish wine, Rioja. We know we're in Rioja when we come to this bodega. This is a fountain. It's rather unique. One spigot is for water and the other is for red wine. And pilgrims are able to have a free glass of the vineyard's red wine, even at 9 o'clock in the morning. Now, usually we don't drink wine at 9 o'clock in the morning. When we have breakfast, it's not a glass of limonada either. It's usually a café con leche and a slice of tortilla español, which is a very delightful potato and egg kind of frittata. Other mornings, we might have an empanada and a glass of fresh squeezed orange juice. That's called zumo. A Spaniard told me that zumo is the sunshine of Spain in a glass. Not only are there walkers on the Camino, there are many cyclists. Walking pilgrims have maybe a love-hate relationship with the cyclists. They tend to come up behind you very silently. They don't ring their bell or warn you that they're approaching. Sometimes the Camino is not wide, only wide enough for a single person to go by, and that can lead to accidents and near misses. Some days, Ann and I felt like we were walking at this speed. In the morning, we would set out with lots of different pilgrims, but by afternoon, they were way ahead of us and we were alone. We finally took a rest day in Logroño and had a wonderful evening of tapas, and then continued on. I saw this lady sitting in front of her house, and I imagined that every day she probably sat there and her entertainment for the day was watching the parade of pilgrims go past. More types of waymarks. Because in 2015 it was spring, every now and then we were able to see and enjoy beautiful red poppies. At Santo Domingo de la Calzada, we visited the cathedral because inside there are live chickens. This is to commemorate a Camino legend of a pilgrim whose life was saved in Santo Domingo by a chicken. This is Grignon. We stayed at the parochial albergue here, which is also a Donativo. This stone tower is the albergue. A Donativo is a unique kind of albergue. There is no set fee to stay here. You are asked to pay what you can afford. or what you would normally pay in any other albergue. You're also asked to help with the chores. We stay here because we know the hospitalera. She is a member of the Boston Pilgrim chapter, the Boston chapter of the American Pilgrims on the Camino. After I returned in 2011, I felt the need to do something to support the Camino. So another pilgrim and I started the Boston chapter of the National Volunteer Organization, the American Pilgrims on the Camino. And that organization is dedicated to helping pilgrims and helping to keep the spirit and the system of the Camino alive. That night, we helped prepare the communal meal. This night, there are pilgrims from 14 different countries. Here, I just want to point out one of the unique things about the Camino de Santiago is how international it truly is. You meet pilgrims from all over the world. And even if they don't speak your language or you theirs, you are able to communicate. It is a wonderful, unique experience. After dinner, there is a meditation service in the church itself. But because we're all tired from walking all day, we early retire to the old stone tower. We sleep on the floor on mats, no blankets. It is freezing cold. That night, I wore everything I owned to bed, but I really love staying at Grenion. Next morning, we're up with the roosters and on our way. Because it's spring, it's not only roosters and chickens that we encounter, we see storks. The storks migrate from North Africa to Spain in the spring, and they love to make their nests in the church bell towers. We stay at another donativo to Santos. Here we meet a pilgrim who is on a special mission. Every albergue that he stops at for the night, he prepares a meal for all the pilgrims who are there. This night, he prepared for all of us a paella. And that night, again, we slept on the floor, but this time we had blankets. We are approaching the city of Burgos, and as we do, we reach Atapuerca. Atapuerca is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is a site of an archaeological dig, a settlement of prehistoric men. Walking in that area looks like this, very rocky, sharp, jagged. And Anne has an accident. She falls. When we get to our albergue, Anne meets her Camino angel. Carlos is the owner of the albergue. He takes one look at Anne and he insists on driving her into Burgos to the hospital. He makes sure she's seen and treated and then drives her back so that we can spend the night in the albergue. Now, Anne has been given another appointment for the next day. So the next morning, Carlos drives us back into Burgos. We are supposed to stop for a rest day in Burgos anyhow. We actually gain an extra day because of this accident. So we get to explore the beautiful city while we're waiting for our friend Assunta to join us. Burgos is the home of El Cid, the Spanish hero, and he is buried in the Cathedral of Burgos. The cathedral itself is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And if you go in, you can witness the magnificence of Gothic, Renaissance, and Baroque architecture and art. Here is another statue of Santiago Metamora. And outside the cathedral, we meet a center. So now we are free. From Burgos to Lyon, we are going to walk 100 miles across what is known as the Meseta. The Meseta is like the high plains or prairies of the United States. So if you can imagine walking across the prairies, you get an idea of what the Meseta is like. It's often said that the Meseta makes or breaks a pilgrim. You can see from the altitudes that it is not as dramatic. In fact, it's kind of flat. Often you'll see wind farms in the distance because it's wide open. And it is walking on the Meseta that we discover we are part of the Camino family. Here are Coy and James. They had just graduated from the University of South Carolina. We'd actually met them before Burgos in another albergue. Rosemarie and Urs from California. I had met Urs also earlier. I had met him in an albergue where he was having a really lively discussion trying to explain American politics to a Hungarian. We met Mark on our first day on the Meseta. He was a Brit, but living in Germany. Met him in a bar. When I left the bar, he fell into step beside me and he said, "So, what do you think of spirituality versus religion?" That was the general tenor of the many conversations that I had with Mark as we walked across the Meseta over the days. Here is Stephen from Ireland. With Stephen, who we also met on the Meseta, my conversations tended towards Irish literature, Irish folklore, and paganism. You can see from this that pilgrims are diverse and the topics of conversation can be diverse as well. There is one large hill that you do have to climb. And you notice how barren it is when exposed to the sun. Most days, walking the Meseta look like this, sometimes interspersed with these glorious, beautiful fields of poppies. But again, most of the time it looks something like this, or even this. It was so hot on the Meseta, even though it was only May, that many pilgrims took to getting up before dawn to walk while it was still cool. And if there was a full moon, even walking at night. Peregrinos, stars and the moon, guide them on. Ian in the center, trying to find some shade and not succeeding. So when we get to Salgun, they inform me they have had it with the Meseta. They are going to stop walking. Here they can take a train to Lyon, and if I want to continue walking, they will wait for me there. Well, I do want to continue walking. So the next morning, I set out by myself and alone, really for the first time. But it turns out to be the day that is somewhat miraculous because I discover I have a Camino family. About mid-morning, I stop at a cafe for a cafe con leche. When I open the door and go in, there are Rosemary and Nurse. So I join them. A few moments later, the door opens. In walks Mark. A few minutes later, door opens again, and here is Stephen from Ireland. And a few minutes later, in come Hoy and James. Well, the wonder of this meeting is not only have I met them all individually, each of them have also met each other individually, and we never knew it until that moment. So we continued as a group walking on. We spent the night in the little town all together, had a wonderful dinner, and the next morning set off as a Camino family. A couple days later, we entered Leon. I was able to reunite with Anne and Asunta. It turns out that we are here on a weekend, and it is the Feast of Corpus Christi. So there are processions. We end up staying an extra day here, but not because of the processions, but because of this lady, Natasha, from Arizona. She is staying in the same room at the albergue that we are. In the morning, I hear her get up and go into the bathroom, and then I hear the sound as if someone has slipped on the floor. I call out, "Are you okay?" But I get no answer. A couple minutes later, I hear the shower turn on, so I assume everything's fine. A few minutes later, the water turns off. And a few minutes after that, the door of the bathroom opens. Natasha comes out and announces, "I think I broke my arm," and collapses on the floor. Clearly, she's in need of help. She needs a Camino angel, and who better than Anne? Anne is a nurse. So Anne becomes Natasha's Camino angel. They go to the hospital together, and the doctors confirm she has a broken arm, not just in one place, but in a couple, and tell her that she needs to stop walking the Camino and return home. So we help her get ready to do that. So Anne proves on that day that she is a true Camino angel and pilgrim. When we do leave Leon, we're heading towards the province of Galicia to Santiago, and it is 200 miles left to go. Again, a couple of the places that we go by, you can see from the altitude that we are starting to climb again. But first, we have to finish crossing the Meseta, and it is still hot and oppressive. So when we get to albergue, we are exhausted. Next morning, before sunrise, we are up and on our way again. This is the medieval bridge at Hospital do Brigo. It is one of the longest medieval bridges left in Spain. In the Middle Ages, they used to have jousting tournaments on top. Today, it's mainly pilgrims who walk across to enter the village. The next day, by contrast, it is pouring rain. Of course, we have to walk on, and we come to this refreshment stand. It is a donativo run by a true Camino angel, David. He's operated this free refreshment stand for pilgrims since 2010. On this day, he has rigged a shelter, and he has a big pot of hot water for coffee and tea. We wait to see if the rain will let up, But after a while, it's pretty clear it's not going to, so we have to continue walking. Early afternoon, we arrive in Astorga. Astorga would be a wonderful city to explore if it were not for the pouring rain. In fact, this is a view I took of the cathedral in 2011 when it was sunrise. You can see how the sun lit up the cathedral as if it were burnished gold. It was beautiful. But it's May 2015. It is raining and misty. We have to walk on. A couple of days later, the weather has improved. We are climbing the highest point on the Camino Frances to the Cruz de Ferro. It's dawn. I turn to watch the sunrise, and I take this photo of a pilgrim climbing up behind me. When he reaches me, I show him the photo, and he gives me his email because he wants a copy. Later, I learn he is a minister who lives in Maryland. When he writes his memoirs of the Camino, he asked me if he can use this photograph, my photo, as the cover of his book. We reached the Cruz de Ferro. The Camino tradition is this. Pilgrims bring a rock with them when they leave home. The rock is a symbol of their burdens that they carry. When they reach the Cruz de Ferro, they leave the rock at its base, thus symbolizing leaving behind your burdens and being free to carry on with your life. And we carry on by going downhill and into Ponferrada with its beautiful Knights Templar castle. But of course, we have to continue. And when the way looks flat, it is full of ups and downs. It's beginning to look more like this rather than the Meseta. You can see the terrain has changed because we are approaching Galicia. Galicia is very green. We still have one mountain left to climb, O Sobrero. In 2011, we stayed in a really tiny village, Las Herrarias, the night before we were going to climb up the mountain. In Spain, as you might have gathered, it's really hot during the day, so there aren't very many people out and about. But in the evening, as it gets cooler, the Spanish people tend to come out and congregate in the central plazas to socialize and meet their neighbors. Las Herrarias was so small, it didn't have a central plaza, but it did have this stone wall and stone bench. That's where the senior citizens of Las Herrarias gather at night. In 2011, when we began to climb O Sobrero, we saw this sign. In fact, many pilgrims do rent horses to go up. We walked, taking a break only to let the cows come down. Climbing up to O Sobrero, you reach the border between the province of Castilla-León and Galicia. It's marked by this massive monument. Here, we encounter a mother and daughter from Sweden. They'd actually stayed in the albergue the night before with us, and the mother was a singer. She taught us many songs, including the French pilgrim anthem, Ultreya. So together, we all continued climbing up O Sobrero, singing Ultreya and hearing our voices echo up the mountain through the fog and mist to the chapel at O Sobrero.
Tous les matins nous prenons le chemin, tous les matins nous allons plus loin, jour après jour la route nous appelle, c'est la...
I think I lost something. Sorry for a minute here. I need to get my screen back on. Here we go. Okay. Entering Galicia, now we discover a unique part of Spain. Galicia is actually Celtic in origin. They even speak their own language, Gallego. There are still many of the old houses and some unique foods. This is pulpo, octopus, empanadas stuffed with tuna, and my favorite, pimientos de padron. When I first tasted these, I promised myself I would eat them every day that I could, and I did. The terrain has changed. It's really green, reminded me a lot of Ireland. And we meet Eva and her parents. Eva is the youngest pilgrim that we meet on the Camino. She's about 13 months old in this photo. She and her parents had started walking the Camino way back in France, in Le Puy, and at this point they have probably walked 4 or 5 months. We continue on, taking a side trip to the medieval monastery in Samos. And along many streams and little rivers. Galicia is an agricultural land, as you might have gathered. Cowbells and church bells echo through the valley. Which is which? We reached the 100-kilometer mile marker. This is an important place for walking pilgrims. If you want to receive your Compostela, you have to have walked at least the last 100 kilometers of the Camino and collected in your credential or passport 2 stamps per day. For those of us who have walked for weeks and from a greater distance, it means something else, because it means there are only 100 kilometers left in our pilgrimage. We are almost completed. We're almost finished. And we're approaching the outskirts of Santiago. We reached the plaza in front of the cathedral, and we can admire the cathedral in its majesty. Pilgrims, when they arrive in Santiago, of course, have certain duties to follow, if you will. You have to pay your respects to the relics of St. James. And in the cathedral, attend a pilgrim's mass. If you are lucky, at the end of the Mass, you will see these men hoisting the Buddha Famero up into the church rafters. This is a giant incense burner. It is about 5 feet tall and over 100 pounds. And it takes all those men to swing it through the cathedral. In 2015, we happened to arrive in Santiago on the feast day of St. John the Baptist. It is really interesting because it's also the feast, the celebration of Midsummer's Eve. In Galicia and Santiago, somehow the people managed to combine a celebration of a Christian feast day with a pagan holiday. So as the sun sets, they prepare for the celebration. Musicians gather, particularly here in Santiago, the bagpipers. The Gallego people have a special bagpipe of their own. It's called a gaita. And once the sun has set, they light bonfires in all of the different neighborhoods. You are supposed to run and jump over the bonfire. It was never clear to me whether it was for good luck or to get your wishes granted. Music and festivities through every neighborhood, through the city, all night long. If you are brave enough and strong enough to stay up all night, and many people do, somewhere in the midnight or past midnight, you get to see a magnificent fireworks display. So you can see a pilgrimage is not all pain and penance. You can be happy. Buen camino a todos. Ultrea e Susea. Buen camino to all of you. Ultrea and Susea. Thank you for joining me on my Caminos this morning. And if you have any comments or questions, happy to answer.
So folks, let's give Meg a big virtual round of applause. Wonderful job, Meg. If anyone, as Meg said, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A. If you have any comments, if you have any comments, type them into the chat. Pilar says that this was so informative. Eileen says, wonderful photos, an excellent presentation. Patricia says, very lovely. It brought an occasional smile and tear.
I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Okay. Yep. Janice says, Meg, this was excellent, beautiful photos. Let me see here. Mark says, congratulations. Linda says, thank you very much. Let's get to some questions here. Okay, let me see. Lynn would like to know, why is the scallop shell the symbol of the walk?
Many different explanations. One is that when St. James's remains came back to Spain, there was a fellow who went out to meet the ship, was in danger of drowning, and St. James appeared, saved him, and when he was brought back to land, the man was covered in scallop shells. So that's one theory.
Jane asks, how many miles did you walk daily?
As I said, we were often slower than most. I think an average might have been between 12 and 15 miles a day. One of the advantages, I guess you could say, of walking the Camino de Santiago, particularly the Camino Frances route, is there's so many places that you pass along the way. You can choose how far you want to walk each day. There's no set minimum that you have to walk. There's no rule about that.
Nancy says, I may have missed this, but how long did this take you? And Lois asks, this was so interesting. How long did this take you?
Okay. It took us, I believe, in 2015 to walk from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago, 40 days. I think we'd allotted ourselves something like 42 or 43. Again, we were walking slower. We did take some rest days and took some time to enjoy ourselves as well and appreciate what we were seeing.
Hale says, I'm planning to do the El Camino. Can I have a talk with you to find out more information? Thank you so much for this great talk. You've got me more excited to do it.
Sure, if you want to get in touch with me, maybe
Yeah.
Robert.
Yeah, they can reach out to me. Hale. You can respond to the Zoom emails you've been receiving, and my email address is what's sending out those Zooms. So email me and I can get you in touch with Meg. Christine asks, how old was the oldest pilgrim you met? And then second question, did you have to wear more than one pair of shoes? How many shoes did you bring?
Oh my goodness. Okay. As far as age goes, my friend Wanda and I walked the Lafouille route, as I mentioned, in 2019. At the time, we started on my birthday. I was 72 and she was 82.
Wow.
This was the second time she had walked all the way from Lafouille in France to Santiago. That's over 1,000 miles, by the way. And she was perhaps a remarkable lady for her age, but there are people occasionally that I hear of who are even older than that. As far as footwear goes, I wore hiking shoes, one pair.
Okay. An anonymous attendee says, I appreciate all the connections and family you made along the way, but did you ever feel unsafe?
I personally did not feel unsafe. And in 2017, like I said, I walked the Camino Inglés by myself. However, you do have to be careful. It's the real world out there. It's no fairyland or wonderland. And actually in 2015, there was a woman who disappeared on the Camino Frances, which actually led us to be rather concerned as we walked along where she had disappeared. And unfortunately, in the fall of that year, her body was found. She had been murdered. So not to dwell upon that, because that's a very unusual circumstance, but certainly it is the real world, and you need to be careful.
So someone in the Q&A.
I don't hear you, Robert.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry. All right. Sorry about that, folks. I got bumped off for about 15 seconds. There's someone in the Q&A asking for information about the Boston chapter of the American Pilgrims. on the
Oh.
Camino. I'm going to put information about that in the chat. Did you want to speak to that at all, Meg?
Yeah. The Boston chapter of the American Pilgrims really is perhaps a chapter for New England. And yes, if Robert, doesn't put all the information, one way you can get there is to Google the website for American Pilgrims on the Camino. There will be a link to local chapters, of which, of course, the Boston chapter is one.
Okay, so an anonymous attendee asks, did you do any special training or exercises to prepare for your journey? And Pilar would like to know, how fit do you need to be to hike the Camino?
Opinions on that range for you can walk out your front door and start to, oh, you better train, it's really hard. So it really depends on the individual. As I said, when we walked, we're on the older side, and I do feel that we benefited from training and practicing because particularly if you're going to start by crossing the Pyrenees, you are climbing up mountains, and there's no two ways about it. However, I also looked at training as an important time to discover how good your equipment was, what you might need that you hadn't thought of bringing with you, and how well things work. So you could adjust before you set off on the Camino.
Patricia asks, is this only for Christians, or do you find people from other religions or non-religious people doing this as well?
No. I actually saw on the Camino, someone had draped a t-shirt over a rock and it said, "Atheists on the Camino."
There you go.
Clearly, nowadays, the Camino is many different things to many different people. You do not have to be religious. You do not have to be Christian or Catholic to be on the Camino. Many of the cyclists are just out for a cycling adventure, just as many of the walkers are hiking. There are even people out there who attempt things like jogging the 500 miles as quickly as they can, that kind of thing. So it's certainly not, in their minds, religious endeavor. So nowadays it really is whatever reason choose to walk or run or bike or whatever.
All right, so folks, we're going to take 3 more minutes of questions. So it's probably about 3 more questions. Gail asks, do you need any sort of permit to hike the Camino?
No, you don't. There's no starting point that you have to go and register or anything like that. So people can start anywhere along the Caminos, and of course there are many different Caminos. A lot of Europeans, particularly the Spanish, do sections each year, like a week here and there. There is nothing official that you have to do. If you want to receive a Compostela in Santiago at the end, you do have to have a pilgrim's passport, a credential, and you do collect those stamps to prove that you've walked along the way or traveled along the way.
Now, this is a few questions in one here. An anonymous attendee asks, how much does one budget for a trip like this? How often is food and housing donated? And what do you do about laundry?
Wow. So budget, it really depends on you and the level of comfort and convenience you want. So you could have a very basic Camino. You could stay in the municipal albergues or even camp, cook your own food. Obviously, that would be a minimal amount of money, say anywhere between 15 and 30 euros a day, depending on how austere you want it to be. You can go the other extreme and stay in fancy hotels, go out to Michelin-starred restaurants, and obviously it would be a whole lot more money. So you pick and choose. That was such a multifaceted question. I don't remember all the other pieces, Robert.
So donated food and lodging and laundry.
Okay, so donativo. Sometimes local people set up a stand for free or to ask you to pay what you can. Sometimes that's to support a local parish church. And it can be as simple as a fellow standing out in the road with a bag of apples and saying, here, have one. I walked by in 2011. I walked by a garden. A man was coming out of it. And when he saw me, he opened his plastic bag. He had a plastic bag. He just harvested fresh figs from his tree and he offered them to me. So it could be very spontaneous. Every now and then one that's been there for a long time, like David, so you can almost count on him and count on that as a facility. Wow. And the other question again was?
Well, it was about laundry.
Laundry, okay. Generally, pilgrims at the end of the day, you know, you're hot and sweaty, you're dirty. So you can wash your laundry. Most albergues provide a laundry sink. Usually there's some soap there and you can hang your clothes out to dry. Sometimes, more often now than in 2011, there are albergues that have laundry facilities where there are washers and dryers, or if you're passing through a major town, probably a laundromat that you could use.
Final question. Anonymous attendee asks, have you seen the movie The Way with Martin Sheen? And if so, is it an accurate portrayal of the pilgrimage?
Okay. The movie The Way came out in American theaters 2 weeks after I returned from my first Camino. It had nothing to do with why I went on Camino, and it has nothing to do with any of the reasons why I continue to go on Camino. It's a nice movie. I enjoyed watching it. I might have seen it twice. I don't know for sure. It's a somewhat romanticized view of the Camino, I think, but it's still a good movie to watch, and it does inspire many Americans in particular to want to walk the Camino.
All right, so we're going to wrap it there. Meg, do you have any last words for the audience before we end the call?
Not any, really, except to say that it's a wonderful experience. Walking is a wonderful experience, and I encourage everybody to go out and walk short or long distances. It does wonders for everybody nowadays. And thank you very much.
Yeah, so let's give Meg one last big virtual round of applause. Great job, Meg. I know this was your first time presenting this on Zoom. You did a wonderful job. Folks, look for an email from me either later today or tomorrow with a link to this recording, a link to a feedback survey, and information about some other upcoming armchair travel presentations that might be of interest. So thank you to the Friends of the Library. Thank you to the partnering libraries, which I will again list in the email tomorrow or this afternoon. So anyway, thank you to all those involved. Thank you for watching. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Go Celtics. Have a good night, Meg.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Buen Camino.